The Powder Keg of Europe. How World War I began. World War I did not erupt suddenly or by accident. Instead, it was the result of decades of mounting tensions across Europe, political, economic, military, and ideological. By 1914, Europe had become a powder keg ready to explode. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was the spark, but the explosion was fueled by deep-rooted causes that had been building for years. 1. Europe before 1914, a continent on edge. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Europe was dominated by powerful empires: Austria, Hungary, Germany, Russia, Ottoman Empire, British Empire, France. These powers competed for land, influence, resources, and prestige. While Europe appeared stable on the surface, rivalries and distrust simmered beneath, making war increasingly likely. 2. Long-term causes of World War I. Historians often summarize the underlying causes of World War I using the acronym MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. A. Militarism. European nations glorified military power and built massive armies and navies. Germany expanded its navy to rival Britain's Royal Navy. Countries invested heavily in weapons, war plans, and military training. Military leaders gained political influence, and war came to be seen as an acceptable and even desirable solution to international disputes. B. Alliance system. To protect themselves, nations formed complex alliances. Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. Triple Entente: Britain, France, Russia. These alliances were meant to deter war, but they had the opposite effect. If one country went to war, its allies were bound to join, turning small conflicts into major international crises. C. Imperialism. European powers competed fiercely for colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. France and Germany clashed over Morocco. Britain and Germany competed economically and militarily worldwide. Imperial rivalry increased hostility and suspicion among nations. D. Nationalism. National pride and ethnic nationalism were powerful forces. France wanted revenge against Germany for the loss of Alsace-Lorraine in 1871. Slavic nationalism grew in the Balkans, supported by Russia. Nowhere was nationalism more explosive than in southeastern Europe, particularly the Balkans. 3. The Balkans, Europe's most dangerous region. The Balkans were known as the Powder Keg of Europe. As the Ottoman Empire declined, new nations emerged, each seeking independence or expansion. Austria-Hungary feared losing control over its Slavic territories, while Serbia aimed to unite Slavic peoples into one nation. Tensions between Austria-Hungary and Serbia grew increasingly hostile, with Russia backing Serbia as a fellow Slavic and Orthodox nation. 4. The spark: assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo, Bosnia. Bosnia had recently been annexed by Austria-Hungary, angering Serbian nationalists. A Serbian nationalist group called the Black Hand plotted his assassination. Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb, shot and killed Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. This single act ignited a chain reaction that Europe could not stop. 5. The July Crisis. From assassination to war. The assassination led to a month of diplomatic tension known as the July Crisis. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, blamed Serbia. Germany issued a blank check, promising full support to Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary sent Serbia an ultimatum with harsh demands. Serbia accepted most, but not all, of the demands. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. 6. A chain reaction of war declarations. The alliance system rapidly expanded the conflict. Russia mobilized to protect Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia, August 1, 1914. Germany declared war on France, August 3, 1914. Germany invaded Belgium, violating its neutrality. Britain declared war on Germany, August 4, 1914. Within days, Europe was at war. 7. Why the war was inevitable. Although the assassination triggered the war, it did not cause it alone. World War I was the result of years of military buildup, entangling alliances, nationalist ambitions, imperial rivalries, diplomatic failures. Europe's leaders believed war would be short and decisive. Instead, it became one of the deadliest conflicts in history. 8. Conclusion. World War I began not with a single gunshot, but with decades of tension that made conflict unavoidable. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand merely lit the fuse of an already volatile situation. The Powder Keg of Europe exploded, plunging the world into a global war that reshaped nations, destroyed empires, and changed history forever. After the outbreak of war in August 1914, European leaders expected a swift and decisive conflict. Instead, World War I quickly evolved into a long, brutal struggle unlike any war before it. New technologies, rigid military plans, and the scale of mobilization transformed Europe into a battlefield. 1. War plans and false expectations. Most nations entered the war believing it would be over by Christmas 1914. Their confidence rested on detailed military strategies developed years earlier. The Schlieffen Plan, Germany feared a two-front war against France in the west and Russia in the east. To avoid this, Germany implemented the Schlieffen Plan, which aimed to defeat France quickly by invading through neutral Belgium, then turn east to fight Russia, which Germany believed would mobilize slowly. However, the plan depended on speed, surprise, and perfect coordination, conditions that quickly collapsed. 2. The invasion of Belgium and Britain's entry. Germany's invasion of Belgium shocked Europe. Belgium was a neutral country, and Britain had pledged to protect its neutrality. German troops marched through Belgium in August 1914. Reports of civilian suffering stirred international outrage. On August 4, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. This decision ensured that the conflict would become a full-scale world war. 3. The Battle of the Marne. War turns stalemate. In September 1914, German forces advanced close to Paris. However, French and British troops counterattacked at the Battle of the Marne. German forces were forced to retreat. The quick victory Germany hoped for never came. Both sides began digging trenches to protect their positions. This marked the beginning of a long and deadly stalemate on the Western Front. 4. Trench warfare and the Western Front. From the English Channel to Switzerland, opposing armies faced each other across miles of trenches. Life in the trenches. Soldiers lived in muddy, rat-infested trenches. Disease, hunger, and exhaustion where constant attacks often resulted in massive casualties for minimal territorial gain. Weapons such as machine guns, artillery, and poison gas made offensive warfare deadly and ineffective. 5. The Eastern Front, a different kind of war. Unlike the Western Front, fighting in Eastern Europe was more fluid. Germany and Austria, Hungary fought Russia. Major battles included Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. Russia suffered heavy losses due to poor leadership and lack of equipment. Despite early successes, Germany could not defeat Russia quickly enough to end the war. 6. A global conflict emerges. World War I soon spread beyond Europe. Colonies in Africa and Asia became battlefields. Japan joined the Allies, seizing German territories in the Pacific. The Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of the Central Powers. The war had truly become global. 7. New technology, new horrors. World War I introduced terrifying new weapons: poison gas, chlorine, mustard gas. Submarines, U-boats, tanks introduced later in the war. Airplanes for reconnaissance and combat. These innovations increased destruction while failing to bring quick victory. 8. Conclusion. A war without end in sight. By the end of 1914, it was clear that World War I would not be short or glorious. The early months revealed the failure of traditional war plans, the devastating power of modern weapons. The enormous human cost of industrialized warfare. Europe had escaped a quick defeat, but fallen into a prolonged nightmare. As World War I dragged on, it became clear that victory would depend not only on soldiers at the front, but also on civilians at home. Governments mobilized entire populations for the war effort, transforming everyday life. This was the era of total war, where the boundary between battlefield and home front disappeared. 1. Total war. A new kind of conflict. Unlike earlier wars fought mainly by professional armies, World War I demanded the full economic, industrial, and human resources of each nation. Factories were converted to produce weapons and ammunition. Governments controlled industries, wages, and prices. Civilians became vital contributors to military success. Victory now depended on endurance as much as military strength. 2. Life on the home front: food shortages and rationing. As the war continued, shortages became widespread. Food, fuel, and clothing were rationed. Civilians relied on ration cards. Malnutrition and hunger affected millions, especially in Germany and Austria. Hungary economic hardship: inflation rose sharply. Workers struggled to afford basic necessities. Strikes and protests broke out. Governments borrowed heavily to finance the war. 3. The role of women: with millions of men fighting, women took on new responsibilities. Women in industry worked in factories producing weapons, shells, and uniforms. Operated machinery once reserved for men. Took jobs in transport, agriculture, and engineering. Women in medicine served as nurses near the front lines, provided critical medical care under dangerous conditions. Women's contributions challenged traditional gender roles and helped advance movements for women's rights and suffrage after the war. 4. Propaganda and control of information: governments used propaganda to maintain public support. Posters, newspapers, films, and speeches promoted patriotism. Enemy nations were portrayed as cruel and barbaric. Dissent was censored and punished. Propaganda helped sustain morale, but also distorted reality. 5. Psychological impact on civilians. The war placed enormous emotional strain on families. Constant fear for loved ones at the front, grief from mass casualties, trauma caused by air raids and bombardments. Civilian morale became a key target in modern warfare. 6. Resistance and war weariness. As casualties mounted, enthusiasm faded. Anti-war movements grew. Soldiers deserted or mutinied. Civilians protested shortages and government control. By 1917, many nations faced internal unrest that threatened their ability to continue fighting. 7. Conclusion. Society transformed by war. World War I reshaped society as deeply as it reshaped borders. The home front became a battlefield of production, sacrifice, and survival. Total war changed how governments ruled, how economies functioned, and how ordinary people viewed war itself. By 1917, World War I had reached a critical stage. Years of stalemate, staggering casualties, and economic exhaustion pushed nations to the brink. 2 dramatic developments, the entry of the United States and the exit of Russia, fundamentally changed the direction and outcome of the war. 1. Why the United States entered the war. At the start of World War I, the United States followed a policy of neutrality. Many Americans believed the conflict was a European problem and wanted no part in it. However, several factors gradually pulled the U.S. into the war. A. Unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany used U-boats, submarines, to block British supply lines. In 1915, the British passenger ship Lusitania was sunk, killing 128 Americans. Germany later resumed unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917, attacking all ships near Britain, including neutral ones. This directly threatened American lives and trade. B. The Zimmermann Telegram. In early 1917, British intelligence intercepted a secret German message to Mexico. Germany promised Mexico U.S. territory, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, if it joined the war against the United States. When the message became public, American outrage exploded. This was the final push toward war. See U.S. Declaration of War. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. President Woodrow Wilson framed the conflict as a fight to make the world safe for democracy. 2. Impact of American entry. Although U.S. troops did not immediately arrive in large numbers, American involvement was decisive. Fresh soldiers boosted Allied morale. U.S. industry supplied massive amounts of weapons, food, and equipment. American financial support stabilized Allied economies. By 1918. Over 2 million American soldiers were fighting in Europe. 3. Russia on the brink. The road to revolution. While the United States entered the war, Russia was collapsing from within. A. Problems in Russia. Poor leadership by Tsar Nicholas II. Shortages of food, fuel, and weapons, heavy military defeats. Widespread poverty and unrest. The Russian people lost faith in their government. 4. The Russian Revolution, 1917. A. February, Revolution. In early 1917, workers went on strike. Soldiers mutinied. The Tsar abdicated the throne. A provisional government took power but chose to continue the war, an unpopular decision. B. October Revolution. Later in 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the provisional government. Their promises were simple and powerful: peace, land, bread, ending. Russia's involvement in the war became a top priority. 5. Russia leaves the war. In March 1918, Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. Russia gave up vast territories. Germany could now move troops from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. Although this temporarily strengthened Germany, it came too late. 6. The war in 1917. Bloody stalemate continues. Despite major political changes, fighting remained brutal. Battles like Passchendaele caused enormous casualties. Gains were minimal. Soldiers and civilians alike were exhausted. However, the arrival of American forces shifted the balance toward the Allies. 7. Conclusion. A shift in the balance of power. 1917 marked the turning point of World War I. The United States entered, bringing fresh strength and resources. Russia exited, reshaping the Eastern Front. The war moved toward its final and most decisive phase. The stage was set for the final Allied offensives and the collapse of the Central Powers. By 1918, World War I had entered its final and most decisive phase. Germany, weakened by years of blockade and war, made one last desperate attempt to win before American power could fully tilt the balance. What followed was a series of dramatic offensives and counteroffensives that brought the war to an end. 1. Germany's last gamble, the Spring Offensive. With Russia out of the war, Germany transferred troops from the Eastern Front to the West. In March 1918, German forces launched the Spring Offensive. Goals of the offensive: break the Allied lines, defeat Britain and France before U.S. forces arrived in full strength, force a negotiated peace. Why it failed: German troops advanced quickly but lacked supplies. Soldiers were exhausted and poorly fed. Heavy casualties weakened the offensive. American troops increasingly reinforced Allied positions. By summer 1918, Germany had lost its chance for victory. 2. The Allied counterattack. The 100 Days Offensive. Beginning in August 1918, the Allies launched a massive counteroffensive known as the 100 Days Offensive. Key features: coordinated attacks by Britain, France, and the United States, use of tanks, aircraft, and artillery in combined operations. German defenses collapsed under constant pressure. One victory followed another, pushing German forces steadily back. 3. Collapse of the Central Powers. Germany's allies fell one by one. Bulgaria surrendered, September 1918. Ottoman Empire signed an armistice, October 1918. Austria-Hungary collapsed and surrendered, November 1918. Germany now stood alone. Fourth Revolution in Germany. At home, Germany faced chaos: severe food shortages, worker strikes and protests, mutinies in the Navy. In November 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated the throne and fled into exile. A new civilian government sought peace. 5. The Armistice of November 11, 1918. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice, ceasefire, with the Allies. Fighting ended at 11 a.m. Church bells rang across Europe. Crowds celebrated the end of 4 years of war. The war was over, but peace was not yet secured. 6. Human cost of the war. World War I was one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Over 16 million dead, millions more wounded or traumatized, entire regions devastated. The psychological scars would last for generations. 7. Conclusion. Victory without peace. Although the guns fell silent in 1918, the world faced a difficult future. The task of building a lasting peace remained, and the decisions made next would shape the 20th century. Although World War I ended with the armistice of November 1918, the struggle to secure peace had only begun. In 1919, world leaders gathered in Paris to decide the future of Europe. The treaties they produced, especially the Treaty of Versailles, reshaped nations, punished the defeated, and created new tensions that would eventually lead to World War II. 1. The Paris Peace Conference, 1919. The peace negotiations were dominated by the Big Four: Woodrow Wilson, United States; Georges Clemenceau, France; David Lloyd George, Britain; Vittorio Orlando, Italy. Each leader had different goals. Wilson wanted a fair peace and lasting stability. France wanted security and revenge against Germany. Britain sought balance and protection of its empire. Italy demanded territorial gains. These conflicting aims made agreement difficult. 2. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Wilson proposed a peace plan based on 14 points, including freedom of navigation and trade reduction of armaments, self-determination for nations, creation of a League of Nations to prevent future wars. However, many of these ideas were weakened or ignored during negotiations. 3. The Treaty of Versailles, 1919. The most important treaty dealt with Germany. A. Territorial losses. Germany lost Alsace-Lorraine to France, territory to Poland, Polish corridor, all overseas colonies. These losses reduced Germany's power and pride. B. Military restrictions. Germany was forced to limit its army to 100,000 soldiers, ban tanks, submarines, and an air force, demilitarize the Rhineland. This left Germany vulnerable and humiliated. War guilt and reparations. Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, blamed Germany for the war. Germany had to pay heavy reparations. The economy suffered inflation and unemployment. Many Germans saw the treaty as unjust and cruel. 4. Redrawing the map of Europe. The collapse of empires led to new nations: Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland, Hungary, Austria. While based on self-determination, borders often ignored ethnic realities, creating new conflicts. 5. The League of Nations. The League was created to maintain peace by resolving disputes through diplomacy, encouraging cooperation, preventing aggression. However, it was weakened because the United States never joined. It had no army. Major powers often ignored its decisions. 6. Consequences of the peace settlement. The Treaty of Versailles created economic suffering in Germany, political instability, deep resentment, and nationalism. Extremist leaders later exploited these grievances, most notably Adolf Hitler. 7. Conclusion. A peace that failed. The Treaty of Versailles ended World War I, but failed to secure lasting peace. Instead of healing Europe, it deepened divisions and planted the seeds for another, even more destructive conflict.